Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Viking Academy podcast. Today, we have Grace Gavin. Now, Grace is a co-founder of a company called No Honesty, no as in Know, honesty.com. And the reason why I brought her on the podcast is they have stumbled upon an organizational issue when they were in their business trainings. They used to be EOS implementers. And then what they found is, for those of you who don't know what that is, don't worry about it. The main gist of it is it was a finding that they stumbled across that the problem in organizations and the reason why there was so much friction is because people weren't being honest. And when I stumbled across their stumbling across findings, I thought, holy shit, this is actually a huge, powerful tool, not just for organizations, but for all the Vikings of the Viking Academy and everyone in the world for that matter. I think where all our friction comes in is the fact that we're not able to sit down and actually have an open and honest conversation with one another about what's going on with ourselves and with the world, and for us to work together on fixing problems. Now, here's the thing. In this interview, we go deep into what we call autopilot conditioning and how we've been trained to kind of see the world through a conditioned lens. And the ultimate goal here is for you to figure out who you are and why you're here on the planet. This, we cover off 6 practices that you can do right away from this podcast that will help you become more open and honest in your communications with people. And again, I find out in my exploration in this podcast that the more I'm able to approach this, the more I not only am able to communicate with others more effectively, I learn a whole bunch of things about myself that I had hidden, buried, and conditioned under years of mind games that I've played upon myself. This tool that they have here, the agreement, one of my favorites. I'm actually going to implement it right away because I have a couple of ugly, or shall we say ugly, some difficult conversations to have with people. This agreement is going to make it so much easier to have those conversations now. I really hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed recording it with Grace. I see a lot more opportunities in the future for us to collaborate. So anyways, there you go. Without further ado, let's go explore. Grace, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric. I am so excited to see where this conversation goes.
Me too. It's always a surprise to me where these end up going. I have a rough idea where I want to explore. I definitely have some ideas or some concepts I want to cover, but we naturally just kind of go all over the place. So I want you to start this off just explaining what the mission is on No Honestly. Like what brought you to this? Because I love the messaging and I can't wait to get a little bit deeper into it. But what brought you to bring this to life?
So many different examples in my life and stories in my life, from the professional side of things, the personal side of things. I grew up as the last of 8 kids on a dairy farm. And so one of those aspects is already enough chaos, but you add the other one in, and there's a lot that can and did go wrong in communication. And I think that I'll share a personal one and a work one. Does that work for you?
It works for me always.
Okay, perfect. So on the personal side of things, about 4 years ago, my dad passed away from stage 4 cancer. And 5 months before that is when we got the diagnosis. And my dad was a farmer. He was a fighter through and through. And so I remember it was my mom and myself in the hospital because it was COVID times. And we remember the chaos of the COVID times. And we got the diagnosis, stage 4 small cell carcinoma. And my dad started chemo in the hospital, was gonna fight it, those types of things. And so that's what we did as a family. We planned out the medications, the treatment plan. We tried to keep him farming, but it didn't work out so well. And over the course of 5 months, I just watched my dad, this once giant of a man, very stubborn, very set in his ways, deteriorate in front of us. And what was really tough and what leads me to be so passionate about the work that I do today is that nobody in my family would acknowledge the reality that we were dealing with. And the reality of that was a stage 4 diagnosis. But even further, the reality of that was a 3% chance of survival. And so the question that we never asked is, are we doing the right thing here? We just kind of plowed ahead and didn't acknowledge the reality of our situation. I didn't even look up the stats. That was actually shared by one of my sisters to me. She said there's a 3% chance of survival. And she kind of wondered, what are we doing here? And I almost couldn't accept that reality. And so to me, I lost a lot of time. I lost a lot of questions that I could have asked my dad, being an entrepreneur now, and what he'd gone through and sharing that with me because of not acknowledging the reality of the situation and saying, this this is not a fight that he's likely to win of that 3% survival rate. And 5 months later is when we lost him. And we didn't acknowledge that reality. And I think there's a lot of things in our lives, personally and professionally, that we don't acknowledge the reality of, that we ignore and ignore and ignore until it's too loud and we can't ignore it anymore. Kind of there's a reason the kick the can down the road is a saying. And I think it's really, we do it a lot as human beings. We just are unwilling to acknowledge the reality, to be honest about our situation, or to have other people be honest about their situation. And we leave each other in the dark and unable to actually do anything that would make a difference. And so that's on the personal side of things why this work is really important to me, because I don't want people to go through that and to not know that there's another option out there. And then on the professional side of things that really kicked this work into motion is that myself and my co-author, my co-founder, Ken Bogard, we're helping leadership teams of businesses implement a proven system. If anybody's familiar with EOS, we were helping them implement that. And what we found is that for those leadership teams, there was a rare percentage that implemented the system and just took off like a rocket. It was amazing. But there was a higher percentage that just really struggled. And we were looking at, okay, what's happening here? What's the distinction between these teams? And it was really the teams that had a high ability to be honest and open with each other that made the difference. That meant that they could acknowledge the reality around them. They could say the tough things, get to the root of an issue, deal with it, and move on and not have to come back to it over and over and over again and get stuck. And so that's my personal side of things that brings me to this work and keeps me doing it day in and day out. And the professional side of things, that knowing the difference it can make if you have a team around you that is able to be open and honest, and you're able to be open and honest with that team, the difference that it makes. I'm not saying it's going to make your life easier, but it will make it more of a team effort within the work that you're doing. So it doesn't feel like you're doing it all alone all the time.
There's so many ways I could unpack everything you just said there in those two. Thank you for sharing that personal story. The thing that struck me the most about that, when you were saying about how we ignore the truth, ignore the truth, ignore the truth until it gets so loud that you can't ignore it. But in that first scenario you talked about, the truth was like there was nothing you could do because it was over. Like you ignored the truth for so long, and then the opportunity to actually do something productive or beautiful with that information was gone. It's lost. Um, Interesting. What's your family lineage? What's the background? Because I'm from a Norwegian background, like East Northern European. Like talk about stubborn and not wanting to talk about the reality. Like there's an elephant in the room and no one will talk about it. Like what was your background or your family background?
Yeah, on my dad's side, we are Dutch. So my maiden name was Vandenbrink. That's how Dutch I I am.
Yeah,
Recently got
there's
married
that,
in June.
and the Dutch aren't stubborn at all.
Right, right.
Yeah, so that I find that there's been a theme coming up in the account in the Viking Academy. It's this past conditioning. It's our conditioning to be the people we're not. And for me, it's all about this exploration into figuring out who we are. And that's why I loved when I came across you and got the introduction to have you on the podcast, and I started looking into Know Honestly, the website, and what the message was. I was like, this is amazing, because we can't move forward without telling the truth. And so there's like the fact that you've seen this happen in your life personally and professionally, and then it spurred you to bring forth No Honesty as an actual business. And tell me a little bit more about that. Like, how do you? And then I want to dive back into the nuances of honesty. But what brought you to bring the business forward?
It was just this continued curiosity from people. So originally, it was just going to be a book, and it was actually Ken was going to put it out into the world, and we didn't really know where it would go from there. And then I got more involved with it. And then we created our Pursuit of Honesty assessment because people wanted to put numbers to this. And then they were talking about, okay, well, how do I do this with my team? What does that look like? And so taking the process further. So the book is actually, when people read it, it's one half education theory. The other half is the practical application of it, because what we found out there is that there's so many fantastic books on communication and leadership, but the applicable part of them is really missing. I was like, okay, what does this really look like in practice? And so half the book is what we call the 6 practices to actually put the ability to be open and honest into practice, because that's just, it's not out there in a real clear way for people. And if we're not starting from the same basis point, if we're not starting from the same foundation within our relationships, within our teams, within our organizations, well, then it's really hard to get on the same page. And so for the listeners out there, I just want to be clear on what we mean by open and honest, because a lot of times we take open and honest in our culture right now to just be about ourselves. And that doesn't work when we're in a team and when we're in an organization. So the first half, we have honesty, which we define as being truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel. Really, really important. We got to have that side of things. And then we find that most people are better at this than they are at the other side of the equation, which is openness. And the reason I think people are better at honesty is because it's what's put out into our world a lot more. The me, myself, and I side of things is a lot more clear. But what we don't address a lot of times is the openness side. And so here's where I'm going to challenge listeners to think about openness differently. Openness, as we define it, is listening without reservation, putting your needs and wants on pause for someone else. And I would challenge people, how well are you doing that today? How well is your team doing that today? How well is your organization as a whole doing that? Heck, how well are we doing that as a world today? And we have the data through our assessment that shows that we are worse at being open than we are at being honest. And there's a lot of reasons that go into that, but it's acknowledging the 2 halves of communication, and we're missing a big half.
You must have been reading my mind, because this is exactly where I was going in my head, because I hear about this authenticity and be yourself and just freely express who you are. Well, I don't want a truly authentic brain surgeon, which all of a sudden comes to me on the day of my surgery and goes, you know, Eric, I'm just not feeling it today. I really just don't feel like being here for you and doing this. So I'm going to be authentic to myself, and I'm not going to do the brain surgery today. And I'm like, no, I need it done now. Like, where's that balance between self-centeredness and self-serving? And I think that's what we're talking about here when you're looking at honesty and openness, is like being honest with yourself. This is where I'm coming from, but then being open and saying, even though this is where I'm coming from, I need to serve others. This is it's like my duty or my honor to serve others. So I need to be open and listen to other people's needs, put the two together, and then how can I find a solution between the two, right?
Yes.
And because I find, and you know what, I'm guilty. Okay, I'm a man of extremes. Like, I'm a chartered accountant on one end, like I'm a CPA on one end, and then I'm a heavy metal enthusiast, and I play drums and scream loud, crazy 80s heavy metal. Like, I go extremes on both sides. So I
Gotcha.
okay, I'm going to be 100% honest with myself, but then I'm also going to go over here and I'm just going to be self-sacrificing and serve everybody. So I personally have this oscillation between those two ends of the spectrum, and I see that happening in society. And we do that. We'll switch all the way to the right on the political spectrum. Then we switch all the way to the left on the political spectrum. And it's like, where's this middle balance? And I think what you're talking about here is this middle road, this middle way, is like being honest with yourself, but also being caring for others. So how do you reconcile those two?
Yeah, I think we get so focused on the honesty side of things, of I have to be heard, make it about me, because a lot of times there's not somebody on the other side who's open to us. And it's because it's not modeled well, I think, out in society. But when we are open with somebody else, when I'm really listening to what you have to say, I'm giving you an experience that you don't get a lot of other places. They did a study and they said we walk through our days and we only feel really, really heard 5% of the time. And so then it's no wonder that we go to extremes where we have to feel like we have to scream out our honesty to be heard. Well, it's because to some extent we do have to be, because there's not people out there who are really listening to what we have to say. And I want to make a distinction there that I'm saying listening to other people. I'm not saying you have to agree with people. I'm not saying that you have to like what they have to say, but we're losing the ability to even just hear somebody who's on the opposite side of, I don't know, the political spectrum, or an idea in the workplace, or a project that they see it completely differently. And what we're being taught and what we're being told to do right now is to just shut them down, not hear anything they have to say. They are absolutely wrong. And what that does is hinders our ability to collaborate and to come together. We share this world with 8 billion people. So we cannot be the only person with the best, right, most amazing idea. That doesn't work. That cannot be the reality. It just isn't. There are so many people who have gone through different experiences who see things differently. And so we do have to create that collaboration and come back into the middle. And that's just not happening these days.
And this is again why I was so excited when I saw your website and I saw what the messaging was. I went, this is so needed in society right now, is to go, we need to be open and honest with one another, but we need to be able to sit and be, well, let's be honest with ourselves and open with others. It's that now that you put those two together, I can see how that's the mixing of the two, where, in ancient Greece and Roman, they used to debate topics all the time, and they were
Mhm.
contentious issues, but it was an active, debated, let's get into the and talk about our differences so that we can figure it out. Now we have this cancel culture where it's the minute you have say something that, well, that's wrong, we're just going to cancel it and we're not even going to listen to it. I'm like, how can that help us? Like, that moves to a totalitarian state, which I am so violently against. I can't stand that thought of someone telling us what to do. I'm an incredibly stubborn Viking, and you cannot tell me what to do. I will not do it. Right. But it's being open and having that communication with another person. And the thing that I've found is, when I've had moments where I've been completely open and just said, could you please explain to me where you're coming from so I can understand it? As soon as I start to empathize or start to understand where they're coming from, it's almost like I unlock another part of my brain or my emotions that goes click, and I go, oh, I resonate with that. And now I get it. Now I understand why you're coming from this, because there's a part of me that feels that way too, but it was maybe buried under a bunch of conditioning and hidden. So I find that openness actually helps me understand myself even better.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is I don't know that we get into this in the book specifically, but as I'm talking with more people and having more conversations about this, it's the openness can feel scary to people at first. They're like, "What do you mean? I'm going to listen to somebody. I'm going to put my needs and wants on pause. Like, then how am I going to get what I need?" But when you can do that, I think it helps people stand more firmly in themselves as well. Because I can hold on to my honesty, what I think, what I believe, and then I can stand in that really strongly and be open to you. It creates a whole new dynamic where I'm like, I'm confident in what I've got, but I also know that I can continue to learn and to grow, and I'm not staying stuck anymore. I'm like, oh, like you're saying, I can relate to that. Or maybe I see it from a different perspective, but now I understand at least where you're coming from. I had this conversation with a gentleman a while ago, and we were on complete opposite sides of everything. We talked about politics, we talked about feminism, we talked about all of the topics that you can think about, the most contentious things. And even within myself, even doing this work, I could understand why people get so fearful around these conversations, that like fear of like running away because this felt threatening to a second. And I had to think to myself for a second, no, wait, hang on. Just because he believes these things and he sees these things differently doesn't have to change what I see. But now I understand him more. And you know what happened out of that conversation, Eric? We found common ground. And I said, here's where I see this. And he says, here's where I see this. I'm like, okay, I think we're actually aligned on this. He's like, yeah, I think we're just using different language around there. And it didn't become hostile, and it so quickly could have. But instead, we found a middle ground together, and we had a better conversation because of that. And I'll tell you, we have a stronger relationship because of that.
Yeah, and therein lies the I've had a bit of a battle myself, and just from the Viking Academy perspective. So the whole idea of the Viking Academy was to call it self-improvement wrapped in a Viking blanket. So it's like
Mm.
exploring the mind, the body, and spirit, but being an explorer, being courageous and exploring. And another phrase that I use quite often is from Krishnamurti, was a spiritual teacher. He says, "A mind that is constantly learning can never be hurt." And that's something that just keeps in my head. If you're constantly learning, if you're constantly exploring, if you're bravely going and exploring and being curious and always learning and never keeping yourself stuck, you will never be hurt because you're constantly growing and learning that next phase and that next step of your life. But the Vikings were all like, no, you don't like it, grab my sword and I'm just going to go beat you over the head. That's not what I'm talking about by being a Viking, right?
Okay.
At the same time, it's kind of like, oh yeah, be a Viking, rape and pillage. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's like, it's being fearless in the exploration. And that's what the Vikings, they embraced that ethos, and they also embraced the mind, body, and spirit as well. But for me, it's I want to be able to have, and I'm working on this too, where it's like, I mean, I'm still trying to get myself wrapped around and going, just be open when I'm really pushed. Someone says something and a big blocker comes up. I'm like, okay, wait, Eric, do you really understand what they're feeling and thinking? And it's like, I'm trying to change my thinking around that so that I can approach it the way you're talking about, so that I could have some of those beautiful moments where you just had with that someone who was completely on the different side in terms of extreme right, extreme left, if we want to just call it from a political spectrum, or if it was religion, whatever it was. But having a conversation where you found middle ground, because as humans, we all want the same thing. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel productive. We all want to have our children grow in a safe environment. Like every race, every human wants that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, we have triggered it in different ways where all of a sudden violence becomes somehow a solution to give us the things that we really want, but it doesn't work. Like it does, violence doesn't work. It never works because there's no ending cycle to it. But what you just talked about there felt like a completion, like it was, oh, we found middle ground. And all of a sudden there was a piece to it because it's like, I get you, I understand you, you understand me. So that's why I think the work you're doing is so incredible and it's so important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think as I observe and what's happening there is that when you talk about the violence, what violence does is it locks us into conflict. And
Mm.
then we can't get out of it. If those are watching on video, my fingers are locked together and we can't get out of it because we're stuck in the conflict at that point. And what I view open and honest doing is it creates around that conflict a way to behave and to operate so that we can unlock from it, to come back to say, okay, am I being honest here? Am I being open here? And when we get locked in conflict, we're really great at being honest, brutally so. Like we're talking about clubbing people over the head and all those types of things. But what brutal honesty does not do is it does not create a real conversation. Because if I'm going to come at you with a dagger or with a club or whatever, what is a human's natural reaction? It is to lean away, it is to run away, it is to protect, right? And within the book, this is one of our 6 practices. And you touched on it a little bit, but it's what we call the wall. And so if I'm coming at somebody with brutal honesty, they are immediately not going to be open. They're going to put up what we call the wall. And so I want you to imagine quite literally a brick wall. And when somebody puts up a brick wall between you and them, what happens to your communication? It's done. It's gone. And we as individuals are doing that all the time to each other, consciously at times, but a lot of times this becomes subconscious. It's just the way of operating, the way our neural pathways in our brain have been going for so long that we don't even realize, oh, when somebody says something on around religion, I don't want to talk about religion, so I'm going to put up a wall there. And so you never get to know somebody's perspective or learn something different. Or if somebody, I see this happening in the workplace all the time, if somebody brings a new idea and their last idea sucked and it didn't work out and it created a lot of extra work for you, you immediately put up a wall to that too. You're like, I don't want to hear anything of what they have to say. And then I see teams missing out on transformational ideas because they're simply not willing to be open to it. They're not willing to just for a moment entertain the idea to see where it could go because of the previous history there. And it really holds us down and holds us back.
And that is all driven by the mechanism of the mind and the emotions, which is to protect ourselves. So, I have a psychology degree, so I've done
Mm.
lots of work in the psychology realm in this, but I keep getting deeper and deeper into this idea of our we don't see reality for what it is. No one sees it for what it is because of our past conditioning and our yeah, it's our past conditioning because we don't see things the way they are because, for example, like you just said, the one person they came up with an idea, it didn't work. Well, now the second time they bring it up, you're instantly going to stay away from it. Well, why does the mind do that? And it's always just a protection mechanism because that's what our minds and emotions are just constantly trying to keep us alive and safe and secure. So the mind on the lizard brain, I call it, I think we need an
Mhm.
upgrade to our software system. I think our whole consciousness needs to be upgraded before we can move forward, move beyond where we're at right now with this whole conflict and violence. It, you need to be able to be open to hearing what you just said. Like, where is the brain just protecting me? So if I can actually stop and go, oh, the reason why I'm feeling that way is because that's my lizard brain telling me to try and protect me. But is it really helping me in today's world? Like the cell phone, I'm going to hold the cell phone up. There's so many messages and stuff coming on here. It's saber-toothed tiger. That's all my brain tells me. It's a saber-toothed tiger. So it's just trying to
Yeah.
stop but it's not real. Like it's not based in reality. And so what you're talking about here is like the person's idea was wrong and it didn't work before, but did anyone die from it? No. Why am I behaving like if we try and entertain another idea from that person, we're somehow going to die from it? Like
Hmm.
that's where the logic doesn't come in. But if you look at it and say, oh, this is just my brain activating this way to try and protect me, but does it really, and then looking at it honestly, and I think this is that honesty is looking at how your brain honestly works. And
Yeah.
then saying, if I'm not being open, I like this construct. It's really starting to sink into me. So being honestly looking at what my brain's doing, but then saying I need to be open to grow and to get along with other people. So why don't I just entertain this idea again? And there's nothing wrong with talking about an idea, but every time I see my brain saying no and blocking it off, just looking at it and go, oh, it's just trying to stop me because it has a history of this person's idea is not working. But what if this one does?
Right. And
Doesn't
it's
mean we
not
have to
the
implement it. We can decide about whether or not implementing it, but at least let's entertain it.
exactly, exactly. And for those listening that hear protecting, you're like, well, I'm not, what am I protecting myself from? I'm not under threat here. Protecting can look a lot of different ways, like we're talking about the past conditioning, but protecting can also look like your brain trying to protect your energy and wanting to be the most efficient possible. Our brain is an efficiency machine. That is why when you have a conversation with somebody, 9 times out of 10, it will go, how are you doing? Good. How are you? Good. Okay, great. Because we have made that a standard introduction, our brains there are trying to conserve energy. And what might have used to have been a way to connect with somebody is now just this rote thing that we do over and over that doesn't actually serve us anymore to connect us. And we're doing that over and over again by putting up these walls and trying to protect ourselves in certain ways. We're trying to protect our energy because that's how we evolved to be efficient. And now efficiency still is important to me, but it looks different now. And is it efficient to always shut down your team members' ideas? Certainly is not. It only serves to break down your team.
On that whole rote, we say, oh, how are you? Great, great. How are you? Great, great, great. The best way to break that is when someone says, oh, how are you? And you turn and look at them and say, do you really care?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll just boom, you see them kind of deer in the headlights, like, oh, and now they got to think. Now you have to think, I just made you conscious. It's like, do you really care? And then you go, yeah, Eric, actually, I really do care. Well, because you really care, I'm going to tell you, I actually had a really shitty day this morning. And this is what happened. And now you're engaged in a real conversation instead of this surface garbage. Like when anybody, and here's another one, when somebody asks me what I do, great one-liner, because I also find that when people come and ask you, oh, so what do you do? All they're really doing is trying to figure out where you are in the pecking order. Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you a brain surgeon? Are you a rock star? Are you digging ditches? Are you picking up garbage? Like, you know what I mean? They're just trying to figure out where you land. My favorite one is like, oh, so what do you do? And I always say, as little as possible. And then they laugh. And then they go, oh my God. And that's hilarious. And then we've broken the ice and now we're having a real conversation. And that
Exactly,
really
exactly.
is. I keep saying, yeah, I do as little as possible. Now, my little as possible is maybe someone else's 5 jobs, but it's still for me as little as possible.
No, that's so good. It shocks us out of that because you said it makes them conscious. It takes us off the autopilot because we are on autopilot so often. But when we're on autopilot with somebody else, what we're losing then is connection. We're not really connecting with somebody else there. We're just almost pretending at having a conversation at that point. It's like we've made these scripts out in our mind and we're following it. And when you do that, when you say, I do as little as possible, you're breaking the script. You're making something different there. We're getting to something fun or innovative or different that's gonna create a new neural pathway for somebody. It's gonna shock them out of the system that they're in.
Yes. And I'm starting to play with that more because I'm really realizing that the fun comes in the play. Like
Hmm.
if we can start playing a little bit more instead of making things so serious and heavy and right? And my history, I come originally from the accounting world. So I was chartered accountant and I was in there for 26 years and then I started coaching accounting firms. But those that we're talking about heavy, you want to talk about honesty? We bring up
Serious.
ideas and things to change and the partners of the firm instantly crush. And every time you came up with a new idea, you'd get crushed in front of everybody. And finally, everybody went, fuck it. We're not going to say anything anymore. So you're sitting in a board meeting and then the partners are all pissed off because no one's bringing anything to the table. Well, of course, we're not going to bring anything to the table because every time we say something, you make us look stupid in front of everybody and you destroy it. Right. And that whole communication model is horrible.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. There's a total lack of openness there in that scenario. And then they wonder, well, why are people not being honest? And that honest can look like new ideas, or it can be, I see it in clients all the time where there's a process that's broken, but nobody wants to bring it up to fix it or to say, what, we could be more efficient here. We could do this differently because the leader is not open. They are not willing to entertain any different ideas. They are not willing to listen to what somebody has to say. Now they might quote unquote listen. They might say, mm-hmm, yep, uh-huh. But they're not actually taking it in and understanding what the person is saying. They're not listening without reservation. They've got all those walls up, those guardrails that they're not really there in the conversation with you, so nothing changes. And then if nothing changes, and I'm going to bring you another idea just for it to do nothing again,
Mhm.
and then the leader ends up wondering, why did nobody tell me about this? Well, you got to look at yourself and wonder, were you really listening to people? Were you really listening? My bet is you weren't.
Oh yeah, and I know when I'm not listening to somebody because I'm busy thinking about all the things I'm going to say as they're talking, and I'm like, am I really listening to this? So
Yeah.
in this, so there's two, so honesty and openness has really got me thinking in terms of getting off of autopilot. I want to become more consciously aware. Can you share a little bit more about these? You said there were 6 modalities or five. What was it in your book?
Yeah, 6 practices.
Okay, yeah. So
So yeah, so what we want to do at No Honesty is I'm really focused on making communication simple, tangible, and implementable because I want an entry point for everybody. I want us to all be on the same page so that we can move forward and then be efficient. But sometimes we're not clear on what kind of communication we want within our team. So Ken and I have created the 6 practices because open and honest is not like you got it or you don't. There's skills we're building all the time. When we first started researching this, Eric, and we really looked at, okay, so everybody wants to be honest. Honesty is the best policy. Why is it not happening? And that's where we found openness is there's people on the other side who just are not willing to listen without I can't talk, reservation to each other, putting their needs and wants on pause. And looking at that, I was like, oh, shoot, I am not good at that. I like to be efficient and and plow through things, and it's my way or the highway type of thing. Got that from my dad. Love you, Dad. Thank you so much. Not one of the skills that I learned there because of that. And I looked at it, I was like, oh shoot, I really got to work on this because I was doing what you were saying before, constantly pre-populating my ideas, thinking, oh, I'm going to jump in here because this is really good and I got to share this. And while there is value to sharing the ideas and getting excitement and having that energy going in a conversation, what I didn't realize is what I was doing is I was cutting everybody else off. And I was not letting them finish their side of the conversation, knocking down their honesty. So again, they're not going to bring it to me as often as possible. And so I say that to say that I've really worked hard in these past 4 years of doing this work, writing the book, working with clients to be more open, to really just sit there and listen to somebody, let them complete their full sentence, their thoughts. So, and then pause, then have my response. That pauses me processing, what am I going to say next? These are skills that we build. And so that's why we call them the 6 practices, because they are practices that we do on a daily basis, weekly basis, quarterly basis that help us build more openness and more honesty in each relationship that we have, in each team that we're in our organization, whatever that looks like for you. It's a process over time. It's a pursuit that we go on with our clients. It's not, here's the definitions, boom, you're really good at this. That is not the reality of how human beings work.
Right. And so what are those 6 practices?
Yeah. You want me to just list them real
Yeah,
quick?
just list them off. We don't need to
Okay.
go super deep into one, but I just want to understand so the listener has like a framework to go, oh, and so just, this I was thinking about this beforehand with the conversation is that we're going to naturally go into business, which is I love because I'm a business owner and I have entrepreneurial coaching companies and finance businesses. And so I love business. I love that side of the world, but it's the personal development. I think it's all part of it. So we're kind of weaving in and out because if you're not honestly being yourself, and again with Julia Waller, bringing your unique ability to the world and then
Mm-hmm.
doing it in this collaborative effort with other people, we can't make anything happen in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's your family, the family function doesn't work if there's no honesty. And I mean, I like when you were sharing the story with your family, that tugged at my heartstrings because we didn't have true honesty in my family. Like it just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't there. And it was like put your nose to the grindstone and work. Or if it was something, there was stubbornness and it didn't happen. So this framework is not only for business, it's for life. Like for me, that's why it's so important. So what are the 6 practices that you
Yeah.
outlined?
Yeah, I'll share them. And I do think they're applicable across work
Yeah.
life and personal life. So the first one that we start out with is the assessment. So that's our pursuit of honesty assessment. It gives the real-time data on your ability to be honest and to be open. And we do break it down into your personal life and your work life because they are different at times. Now,
Hmm.
hopefully they're aligned, but if they're not, we need to know that. We need to understand, all right, why is this person not showing up this way at work? Is it the team around them? Is it their leader? There's more to uncover there. Or if it's not happening in their personal life, what's going on there?
Hmm.
So that's the first one. Then from there, once we know where the numbers are, we understand, we get deeper into what's blocking us from being 100% honest and 100% open. That's the next 2 practices, one of which I already shared. But the next one is fake you. So that's the facade we project rather than being 100% honest. We know what it feels like to be fake. We have done it all the time. I used to do it when I went to networking events. It is exhausting and it is not serving us or the people around us. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the wall that we already talked about. That is the divide that blocks us from being open with other people. It's the divide we create between ourselves and others rather than being 100% open. So that's the first 3, the assessment, fake you, the wall. Then from there, we go to the agreement. And the agreement is this simple, powerful, proven script that we've developed that you can kick off any conversation with that will get you to real communication so much faster. And essentially, the quick version of that is I want you to be 100% honest. I promise I'll be 100% open, and then I will be honest with you, and I ask that you be completely open to it. We very rarely start out conversations like that these days. We very rarely put the boundaries and expectations of the kind of communication we want to have. And especially in a workplace setting, we have a whole employee handbook a lot of times that says here's all of the do's and don'ts, but we don't often put communication in there. So that's where the agreement comes in. And you can have that in place in your workplace. You can put that in place with your family. I've done it with my mom. I've done it with my husband. And it just it's a living, breathing agreement. So we come back to that because as humans, we will fall short of that, but we can come back to it and use that as a guidepost. Then the fifth practice is the still. And what this still is it's a snapshot of the current version of yourself. And so I have leaders go through this because a lot of times as leaders, we're busy, busy people. We're constantly flitting and running around from thing to thing. We don't pause to reflect on where we're really at in our life. And so we look at the still looks at your life through a series of categories and we look at are you content or discontent? Because if you're content in a lot of areas, so fantastic. I love that for you. It is showing up in your leadership. If you are discontent in a lot of areas, that is also showing up in your leadership, and we need to be aware of that and where we can course correct, which leads us to the last of the 6 practices, which is your pursuit. And your pursuit answers the question, what do you really want? What do you really want? Because again, we don't pause to consider what are we working towards as a team, as a spouse, as a any relationship in our lives. What do we really want? And when we can put our lives in that context, it gets really clear on why we need to be open and honest and how it works us towards that. Because when I have clients clarify what it is they really want, I then ask them, okay, what's the next step that's going to get you towards that? And about 80% of the time, it's a conversation that they have to go have with somebody where they have to have open and honest conversations. Because again, like I've been talking about, we can't do it alone. We don't get towards what we really want alone, which also means that we have, I think, an obligation to help other people get what they really want. And when we can do that, I believe the world gets to be a really beautiful, interesting place.
That's awesome. So I wrote these down. So the first one is the honest. So you do a honesty assessment to figure out how honest are you right now, like your honesty ability,
And openness. Yep.
and your openness, your honesty and openness assessment. Number 2 is the fake you. Number 3 is the wall. Number 4 is the agreement. Love that agreement. Man, that
Hmm.
could have, I'm using that like today. I know there's a conversation I'm going into today. I'm using it today, 100%. The snapshot. I like that. Again, I think maybe identifying where you are, what's holding you back from being honest and open. So if you're
Hmm.
discontent in an area, because anybody who's really secure in themselves, and I think anybody who acts untoward another person, they're just insecure. They just are insecure people because you don't hurt somebody if you're completely secure in yourself. You don't like physically, mentally, emotionally hurt someone. So it's figuring out where those maybe unconscious things are, you're bringing them conscious. You're bringing them up, saying, "Hey, here's where you're discontent," and that's probably causing part of the reason why you're not able to be as honest and open as as the assessment says you, why the assessment says you're not that way.
You're
And
exactly
then,
right.
and then ultimately being completely honest is like, what do you really want in life? I think that's a question very few people can really answer. Like, what do you really want? But when you stop and actually think about it, you go, well, if you knew exactly what you really wanted, and then you looked at your behavior, you could tell right away where your behaviors are taking you farther away from what you really want or bringing you closer to it.
That's exactly right. And sometimes I'll get people asking, well, isn't that really selfish, Grace? Asking people what they really want. And for some people, the answer is yes. But a lot of times, what I find is that the first 30 seconds of when I ask somebody what they really want, all the selfish things come out because they haven't been heard or these are things that they just immediately think of. But when I give them another minute or another 5 minutes or another 10 minutes and they go deeper and I say, okay, let's go beneath that. What is it that, okay, why do you want that? And why do you want that? Well, I want to connect with my family. Okay, so that's why you want to make a lot of money because you want to be able to not have to work so hard anymore because you want to spend time with your family. Okay, and why do you want to spend time with your family? Because I feel like we're not really connecting. Okay, well, if that's what you really want, well, there are some changes that we can make that don't necessarily equal to you having to make a lot of money so then you don't have to work anymore so you can hang out with your family. Maybe it's an adjustment in your working hours, or there's so many different ways that we get at it. But when we can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to think about it at a deeper level, I find that people really want some beautiful things. And it ends up a lot of times being connection with others or helping others have a better experience. In the workplace, it's I want a better culture for my people, or I want a better employee experience, or I want this team to have the work-life balance that we've been craving for years. It becomes a lot less selfish when we take a minute for it and really think about what do we really want. But because we're so busy, because we're always activated, because we're always moving, it's the selfish wants that tend to come to the forefront. And we think if I just get that, then I'll be happy. If I just get that, then I'll be happy. And the question is it really? Is that really what you want?
This rings of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to
Hmm.
me. At Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, it's the triangle, shape of the triangle. For those listeners that don't know it, just do a quick little Google search and you'll see it. It'll be a triangle. And Maslow was a psychologist, and what right at the bottom was your physical, your food, clothing, shelter, your basic needs. But as each level of needs were met, as you get higher and higher up, shall we call the hierarchy, it became more and more what your contribution was to the world and being more enlightened and helping others. Once we can, it's kind of like being in an airplane. They say, take the oxygen mask, put it on your face first, then go and assist others. So it's like if you don't take care of those basic needs for yourself and you take care of yourself first, which seems selfish, but once those first things are taken care of, you can then take care of others. I think this is where that discontentedness versus content. It's like if you can take care of yourself, then you can take care of others. But I think what you're also saying in that, which just popped into my head now, is that we get confused thinking that we need this thing first before we can take care of the second thing. So we need
Hmm.
this money before we can actually help be closer to the family. But when you put the spotlight on what they really want is being close to the family, they don't necessarily need more money. They just need to readjust their priorities because we're caught in this hierarchy of needs, thinking that I can't have the higher order things I want without the lower order being the way I think they should be. And so you've
Right.
just kind of crushed the hierarchy model, so to speak. Actually, that's really cool. I'm gonna
And I
think about
think
that more.
also it's about what is what is your reality versus what have you been told is reality. So we've been told that to be able to, and let's just keep going with example, to be able to spend a lot of time with your family, that you have to make a bunch of money so you don't have to worry about anything ever again. But have you ever heard the story of the fisherman where I think it's a CEO or something, goes to this guy who's fishing on a dock and he says, why don't you like build up a whole empire out of this and make all this money so that you can then sit and fish on the dock? And he's like, well, why would I do all of that when I can already sit and fish on the dock? Why would I go through all of the stress of building an empire, hiring a bunch of people so then I can come back and sit on the dock? Well, that's kind of what we follow all the time. And for some people, that's the right way to go. And that's what they want to do. And that's what they need to do. But we all follow that. If we're on that autopilot, if we're not conscious of it, we just kind of follow the path that's been laid before us without considering, is this what I really want? Is this how I want my one unique life to go? And I think I could go on a tangent about this, but I think maybe that's where we see midlife crisis start to happen. And why they happen is because people start to become conscious of like, oh, hang on, I have been on this train for the last 20 years and this isn't actually what I want. And so without going deeper and considering what do I really want, they end up, I don't know, buying the sports car or blowing up their life and going somewhere different instead of understanding what adjustments could I make to move towards what it is I really want. Because I don't think you have to burn the whole thing down if you can start at the beginning from making those 1 degree changes, those 1 degree choices of saying, this isn't what I really want. I want to do it this way. This isn't what I really want. I want to do it this way.
But it all starts with telling the truth, which is honesty,
Exactly.
which is where are you honestly in your where are you honestly in your headspace? What is it that you really want? And is the things that you're doing actually getting you towards what you really want? You know, my wife and I, we do this once a year, is that we plan out the next year and say, okay, what do we want for our life? We do a planning for their businesses and for our personal life and our vacations. And, you know, we came to this big aha moment. We went, you know what? We really want we want experiences with our daughter. She's 12, and you were thinking, okay, call it next 5 years before she pops out of or high school, and then she's already told us she's going to go travel the world. She's going to be gone, right? And so we're like, we have 5, 6 years to have experiences with her, and that became a priority. And then all of a sudden, it made everything else so much crystal clear. Like it was all of a sudden, we're like, oh, okay, well then we'll adjust this. This priority goes here, this goes there, blah, 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 blah. And it just created so much clarity for us. And so now we're excited about the next year because we know what we're focused on, because we've gotten clear on what we really want, and we've been open and honest with each other. There's one other thing I just wanted to share with you is I realized I had a big, ugly business situation happen. We went through a legal battle. It took about 6 months. It was horrible. It was just nasty. We had to get rid of a partner. And, but I'm looking through these practices and I'm realizing I never talked to this partner about what was really going on. I was afraid to talk to him about the issue because I was afraid it was going to blow up. And because I didn't talk about it, it ended up blowing up even worse and becoming really nasty. Instead of just applying the agreement and just saying, look, I want to sit down and have a talk with you. And I just want to have an agreement. I'm going to be completely honest with you. And I just want you to be open. And then you're going to be completely honest with me. And then I'm going to be open. Then we're going to see if we can come to an agreement, a solution that's going to help us continue to work together to get our goals that we really want. Because if I had done that, it could have avoided that whole nasty blow up at the end, because we just kept avoiding. And both me and the other partner were not talking to this one guy. Didn't tell him the truth about his behavior, and then it exploded. The whole thing got messy. So I wish I had met you a year ago.
All right. Well, hopefully we're saving you from future heartache and pain then.
Yes. And the listeners. Grace, so nohonesty.com is the website, correct?
That is correct. And just to be clear, it's KNOW. For those that are only listening via audio, it's KNOW. So that's a little play on words there, because right now what we see out in the world, I think at least, is there's no honesty, NO. And what we want and what we hope to transform here is to turn it into KNOW, that people know honesty. They know how to get to it using openness, using the 6 practices. So yes, nohonesty.com.
I love it. And for those members of the Viking Academy, this will all be inside the membership site. I will have all the resources in there so that you can get to know honesty a little bit more for yourself. Grace, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Eric. I never know where it's going to go, and this was fun. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Viking Academy podcast. Make sure to leave us your honest feedback by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify, and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.